Start recording now.
Thank you very much. Well, it is at 11 o'clock, so we'll start the meeting and any latecomers can join in as they come into the lobby. Well, good morning, everybody, and it's good to see you all and all looking so well. So a very warm welcome to everyone. Our first item is apologies for absence, Gareth.
Yeah, from Louise Miskell and Tracy McNulty, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest from committee members? Nothing? No hands raised? Thank you very much. Next item is the minutes of the last meeting. So first of all, we'll do them for accuracy. So page 1. Page 2. And page 3. No comments? Thank you very much. May I have your approval for the minutes, please? Yes. No dissent. Thank you very much. And the next item is the revenue budget. And Kim, would you please take this item?
Could I just check, Chair? Are there any matters arising that anybody wants to raise from the minutes of the last meeting? I think it's all covered in the report, but just in case.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So I'll move on to the revenue budget. Now this is prepared by the accountant, and as long-term members of the committee will be aware that it's quite a few years since the accountant attended one of these meetings to talk about the budget. It's written just for information only, in that the Archives Committee doesn't control the budget, but it is provided with information about the budget for the coming year, and it duly notes the budget at the end of the report. So the revenue budget for 2021-2022 is 299,550, which is only a very small increase, and as we're all aware, it assumes a pay freeze for the majority of public sector workers and just issue around the national living wage. I'm not sure how many staff, the maximum number of members of staff who might be affected by the national living wage, I think is 1. I'm not sure whether it does actually affect any of the archive staff, but there has been a small increase, so I presume it must do. There's a small increase of £750 on the thing, and the budget itself is set out in detail in Appendix A. Before we go on to the issue of the reserves, perhaps if any members wish to raise any questions about the budget itself. I take that as no. I'll go on to talking about the reserves, which is something that's a little bit closer to the committee. So members may or may not be aware that the archives reserves are actually controlled by the committee, because they consist of funds from both councils. So and to put it bluntly, in order to prevent one council spending on something that it likes to the detriment of the other council, the Archives Committee controls the reserves. This time last year, we had 3 reserves in the report, but the publications fund was exhausted, and I think that was outlined at the meeting in March last year, that we'd exhausted the archives publication fund. It has to be said that the only reserve which gets any funds added to it is the so-called training reserve, and that is the fund that was set aside for an archive trainee post, about which more in a second. There is an archives document fund, which is a fighting fund for the potential purchase of any collection that we may need to purchase at some point in the future. That hasn't been added to for a number of years, and it now stands at just under 21,000. I think should the situation arise that we could transfer money from one reserve to another, but thankfully we haven't had to use that fund for a number of years. The last time it was used was to purchase the Neath Abbey Ironworks collection. That was probably about 10 years ago. I can't quite remember somewhere around about 10 years ago. Since that date, we haven't. We spent 20,000 from the reserve at that point, and so we're down to, as I say, just around about 21,000. And then we have the training reserve, which is £30,000 has been added to it this year. So its estimated balance in a couple of weeks' time will be just under £209,000. Now, that's used for the archive trainee post. The trainee post, because of recruitment difficulties, hasn't been filled for a while, and perhaps go into that in detail. I see Councillor Black has his hand up, so perhaps I'll defer to Councillor Black.
It was a question around that, actually. Thank you, Kim. The £30,000 which you're adding to the training reserve, is it a necessity added to that particular reserve? Because it just occurs to me that you have a huge amount of money in there. You're looking at spending around just under £20,000 a year on the training. If you do have a trainee, would it not be better to use that £30,000 to reinstitute the publications budget, for example? It's just, why are we doing this in that particular way?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it should be noted, actually. I think that's probably because I don't necessarily disagree with what you say. Just at the moment, there isn't any planned publication. I think the way that our publication is going, that it's much easier for authors to self-publish, as you're aware, Peter.
As I've done, yes.
Yes. And I think the landscape is changing. I mean, back 20 years ago, people used to come to the archives to ask about whether we would be prepared to publish their books, and that doesn't really happen now. We haven't had anybody for quite a few years. The two books that we published back in 2019, 2020, so it was, yes, John Albin's book was in early 2020. We were the initiators of that, because basically the first book wouldn't have been published, and the second book was a reprint. I think it's worth laying that on the table as a suggestion. I don't think at the moment, I have a suspicion that if we put in 20,000 into the publications reserve now, we'd still, this time next year, we'd still be saying, well, we haven't touched that, because there's nobody knocking at the door saying, could you publish my book, please?
I understand that. I think the problem with the self-publishing route is in terms of quality. For example, if you have a lot of photographs, colour photographs, illustrations, it's most probably cheaper to do it through a conventional route than through a self-published route, because you won't get the quality by doing it, say if you go down Amazon or something like that. So, I understand the reasoning, and maybe, we have the option, presumably, if a publication does come along, to transfer money from that reserve to a publication reserve. I just thought, it's useful to have that reserve there, because I think the archive's function as a publisher is one which I wouldn't want to lose if in the future.
I take on board all your comments, and I think they ought to be duly recorded. I would imagine that the rest of the committee would agree with those sentiments. I don't know how we do that. We can see those who've got their cameras on are nodding, so I imagine that that is a view of the committee. Councillor Smith wanted to.
Well, I don't know if I should declare an interest, but I wouldn't be seeking assistance from the Archives Committee anyway. It would be totally inappropriate. And you know the times I've spent in the archives, Kim. But my question was, how much, what would a one volume cost roughly? And what would we get out of the existing pot of money we've got for publications, in terms of number of publications on average?
Well, we're probably talking something around about 2,000. I'm trying to think. The rebuilding Swansea would cost about 2,000. We had 200 copies, so the cost price was about £10, and we're selling at £20. There is the possibility that we can manage to actually do some of this out of the revenue budget as well, rather than necessarily going into reserves. And so, for example, when we, if we wanted to publish some cards, for example, we could probably do that from the revenue budget. We wouldn't necessarily need to go into the, when we run out of Christmas cards or whatever, if it was thought that we wanted to print more. Similarly, we've purchased some documents in the last year, which are referred to later on in the meeting, and I didn't dip into reserves to do that. So basically, we're quite significantly underspent this year, as perhaps that is worth bearing in mind, that we've got 30,000 going into the reserve because we are carrying a staff vacancy, and also for various other reasons. We're one of those services that have been have underspent because we haven't been able, for example, to carry out as much conservation work as we would have liked, or do. We haven't been on site really, I think, is the fairest thing for the last year. We have been on occasion, and for a period during the autumn there were more people in, but that has seriously restricted what we've been able to do, so we haven't spent money in the way that we were doing before.
Yeah, well, just an indication of scale, and that's answered that, Kim, so thanks.
Back to Councillor Black.
On the budget, if that's okay. As you know, the work is undergoing to relocate the archive service, and no doubt there will be a report to us in due course. Obviously, there's going to be a cost involved in that relocation, not necessarily of the premises we move to, but in terms of getting all the racking in place and all that. Is that going to come out of the archive budget, or will a different source be available for that to pay for that cost of moving all the archives?
That's a very sharp question, I have to say. and I wonder, I don't know the answer to that, but I think there's a degree of prescience in that question, Peter, that maybe the powers that be are actually thinking about that. So I'll pass on that question. I think is probably the easiest thing to say.
I think the Swansea Scrutiny Committee is going to be looking at this in due course. So those are questions I think we'll want to ask, I think, as part of that anyway. Yeah. Okay.
Going back to the reserve. So as you'll see from the report, we haven't got a trainee in post. We have increased the hours of an existing member of staff to cover some of the staff shortfall. We didn't need to dip into the reserves last year, so no payment was made out of the reserves. But it is traditional for me at this time of year to ask that the members of the committee agree, if necessary, that use of the reserves may be made for the payment for the temporary member of staff, be it archive trainee or whatever. I don't anticipate that we would need to go into that reserve, but it's your reserve, it's your money, so you have to approve that. So I would ask the committee to approve that. I think with the caveat, if necessary. I think. Don't know how we do a vote by teams actually, but nodding or raising.
All silence is golden, Kim, and if there's no dissent to it, maybe take it that everyone agrees to that.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of nods.
Yes. Well, we didn't this year, and don't anticipate we will. But however, we need to make sure that that is there, just in case it's asked for. Are there any further questions about the budget report?
No.
Linked into that, and I suppose I'm jumping from the main report there, but it is appropriate while we're on the subject of finance, is to talk about the fees and charges, and that's in Appendix 1. And I've kept the prices at the same year as this year. I'm pleased to say that nobody has been at me to ask for us to raise prices this year, and I really don't think it's an appropriate time to be raising prices anyway. So I've just left them as they are. So I think once again, I think the protocol is that members note the table of fees and charges from 21-22 rather than approve them. But I assume that members are happy to note that thing. So I don't think...
just to confirm, no dissenting voices. So we'll take that the committee agrees to those.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So moving on to my report, I've gone into quite a long detail thing in the first paragraph about the effect of the pandemic on the service, and I think members will be acutely aware of the fact that we've essentially been in lockdown, stay-at-home lockdown for the whole, or no, the majority of the period in question, December to February. So we have hardly had anybody using the service. There was just the first few weeks of December, but since the 20th of December, or when it was the first day that we would have been open, I think it was probably the 22nd of December, we've been unable to take in any users. Obviously we were waiting the announcement at midday today as to what services are going to be able to reopen in the next 3 weeks. My suspicion is that we won't be reopening in the next 3 weeks, but it's possibly the 3 weeks after that. But normally the etiquette seems to be that Mark Drakeford announces which services are likely to resume in the following 3 weeks so that they've got time to get ready, and we certainly haven't had any nods to say that archive services can reopen. I am in work today, by the way, just to say I do, and this does go down to the fact we are still checking the strong rooms. So I've been checking the temperature and humidity in the strong rooms this morning. I also had to open up this morning at 8 o'clock for the lift, the archives document lift, to be inspected by engineer. So I've been in work this morning. But other than that, no. And Andrew's been in at the other end of the week, at the beginning of the week. But there's just been the two of us that have been going in, and obviously that's severely impacted the amount of work that we're able to do. But we just have to make the best of it, really. I mean, it's difficult when you have a job which is so intimately linked to being on a premises to actually for everybody to find work that can be done from home. We've done our best in terms of social media communication and tidying up the catalogue. But there are when we do actually get back into the office, there'll be a whole backlog of work to catch up on, not least that related to the preparations for packing up. And we know that we've only got a matter of years in Swansea Civic Centre, and there is a huge amount of work to be done in terms of packing and labelling and preparing a full inventory of the contents of the strong rooms. So that is work that has fallen behind and that we need to get going with once staff are back in work. I also mention in this section that we don't know when we do reopen properly what effect this will have had on our established customer base. And I think this is probably common to a lot of services, particularly services which are open during the week and during office hours, which are not necessarily good for people who are in full-time work. So mostly our user base are well, I think it's fair to say mostly retired people, but also students, younger people, and there's a big gap in the middle of people who are in full-time occupation. We just don't know what effect the pandemic and the lockdowns will have had on the confidence of people to come out and to help. And I've flagged up here that we're not really very sure about what effect that's going to have in Neath, which has both the Antiquarian Society, who are mostly retired people. I think the volunteers are all retired, and mostly an older user base. So when eventually we do reopen in Neath, it may have a significant effect on the confidence of people to come out and to work in confined spaces and so on. So it's going to be I think 2021 is going to be a very rocky year in terms of trying to go back to normal, and I'm sure that members will bear with us while we're trying to do the best that we can. We're operating I put it in inverted commas, COVID secure service at the moment, but obviously at some point that will be returned to being a normal service, and we will be able to reopen in Neath. But at the moment, with Neath being configured the way it is, that it's not possible to maintain social distancing in that room. Fortunately, we've got the space in the Swansea Civic Centre to maintain social distancing, but I'm not quite sure how that would work in Neath. So I'll keep you posted on how it goes, but it's not going to happen certainly in the next quarter. And there'll have to be discussions with the Neath Antiquarian Society about how willing they are to continue to come along as volunteers. I would imagine that several of the volunteers will say they don't want to come anymore. Simply, many of them will have been at home for a year now if they've been shielding, and so it's quite likely to have knocked back the confidence of a lot of people to come into town and to mingle in crowds and so on. So that's my section 1. I don't know whether anybody wants to pass any comment or anything on that. I'll move on to a brief outline of the social media and outreach activity that we have done in the last quarter. So obviously most of this has gone online now, and I think one of the positive things to come out of the period of lockdown is the people getting very used to Zoom and Teams as a means of communicating. If nothing else, colleagues across Wales have suddenly realised that we don't all need to drive to Llandrindod or Aberystwyth to hold a meeting now, and that all we have to do is click on a link and we can all just meet and get as much business done as normal. So, you know, there have been some positive things, and I think one of the things that's been very positive is the discovery that we could give public talks online via Teams or indeed Zoom, although the council isn't allowed to use Zoom, but we can join other things. So on the well, only a matter of weeks ago, actually, we arranged a talk for the 80th anniversary of the 3-night splits. Dr. John Alban gave the talk, and that was via Teams, and we had quite a number of people, so 176 people attended the meeting, including, I think, some of the people on this call now, actually. I think that we certainly had some councillors anyway, if nothing else. So the talk was very successful, and is possibly a model for future public talks as well. So we did quite a lot for the 80th anniversary of the Swansea 3-night split, including developing or adding to school resources for schools on the subject. So it's been quite a successful learning experience for us about the way that we can use online resources to hold events. You certainly would have got 176 people into any a lecture theatre or meeting room in Civic Centre, and yet I don't think there was any loss of impact from the talk. So it's perhaps a good way, and also people can join from a distance. You don't even need to be in the UK to you could have been in Australia or Canada or wherever. And on this matter of educational resources, I'll just go on to talking about the creation of teaching resources relating to the historic slave trade and Wales's connection with that trade. So I have talked about that quite a bit over previous quarters, and every quarter it seems to have slightly changed and morphed into something else. It's now a really pan-Wales project, and something that Welsh Government is willing to provide funding for if we can come up with a viable means of, probably through the hiring of a consultant to help us to put resources on the All Wales digital resource called the Hub, which is a sort of educational resource for teachers and pupils. It's obviously a really important subject, and something that I think both councils and Welsh Government realise in the current climate, and the importance of being seen to tackle some key subjects that this issues that this subject raises, that we actually do get something onto the All Wales digital resource called the Hub, and probably the most appropriate time for that would be Black History Month this year, which is October this year. So I do hope that we can actually manage to get our act together and get this ready in time. But I think it will be better if we get money from Welsh Government to actually make it a really polished thing. I mean, it started out as a West Glamorgan thing, it became a West Glamorgan and Glamorgan project, then it became West Glamorgan, and Gwent, and now it seems to be All Wales. The National Library of Wales has joined. We're getting participation responses to the invitation to participate from all sorts of local archives from across Wales. I think it is the more pan Wales it is, the better it will be. I think this is specifically, as I've said in the previous thing, it's about module 1, which is about the Wales and the slave trade. I think there's a second module that we could create on the hub, which is about the South Wales coal ports and in the 19th century how ethnically diverse communities came to settle in the South Wales coal ports. Now the heart of that is actually probably the story of Bute Town and Cardiff. So it's really important that we have Glamorgan Archives on board with that, because they have the archives of the Bute Town History Centre, which I think I'm not quite sure where it used to be held. I think it was in the Channel View Leisure Centre, which was demolished as part of the redevelopment of that part of Bute Town when IKEA came and all that stuff. But so that's a really important archive. So I think that essentially we could carry on working maybe as a South Wales project group with Glamorgan and Gwent on that second module. But I'd really like to get the slavery the first module out and launched by October. And just to finish on that thing is that Swansea Council is unveiling a plaque in 2 weeks' time, just under 2 weeks now. So it's on the 25th of March. It's to an anti-slavery campaigner who came from Swansea but was involved in the campaign against the slave trade in the United States. It's going to be launched online again, so we're having a virtual unveiling, and it's going to be on the University of Wales Trinity St David YouTube channel. I do think it's worth there will be social media pointers to that, but it's really worth having a look at that when it goes out on the 25th. So it's a new blue plaque which is going up on UWTSD, the Deneva building, and we're creating a film to go around. So I've been involved in that as well, but it is an important part of the response of the council to the Black Lives Matter movement and the rebalancing of public spaces, names, streets, blue plaques, and everything else that all councils across Wales are going through. Councillor Rees, very happy to defer to you at that point.
Okay, no, just a question, Kim. Are we going to get the join invite as panel members?
It's actually going. It's not going to be. It's actually just going to go up on the YouTube channel. So I think what I could do is once it's posted, the idea is that it will be a 15-minute film with a virtual unveiling, and then it will be posted on the YouTube channel at a specific time, say 11 o'clock, and then social media like Twitter, Facebook will be pointing to that film. Right. So it's not going to be live. It's yeah. But what I can do is I could arrange through Gareth to send everybody the link.
That would be good. That would be good. Some of us non-tech people would appreciate that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the film's going to be very good. It's got Councillor Yvonne Jardine, who's Swansea Council's champion for diversity and equality, together with Councillor Robert Francis Davis making a speech. But then there are also speeches from young person's champion for diversity, Ife Iwobi, who may be familiar to some of the members on here. Also, we've got a message of support from the National Underground Railroad Center in Cincinnati, in Ohio, which is essentially the US National Museum for the History of Slavery, and that's where Jessie Donaldson. So she came from Swansea. She wasn't born in Swansea actually, but she spent most of her, I don't know what age she came to Swansea, but she certainly spent her early adult life in Swansea. Set up a school on Wine Street, married an American, went to live in the States with her husband, and because her husband was an anti-slavery campaigner, they got involved in this National Underground Railroad, which was a means for black slaves to escape to the north across the River Ohio. So they had a house on the banks of the Ohio, which was a safe house for escaping slaves to get across the river and into out of Kentucky and into Ohio. So they were on the Ohio side, so they had to get across the river, and then they were in a safe spot there. So that's the history behind it. But it's all been researched by a lady called Jen Wilson, who's very influential historian on the history of jazz music, Wales's diversity, and other matters. So it's a really promising thing. It's a pity in a way that it's got to be virtual, but in a way that's also a good thing, because you'd have so many people having to stand on a pavement by a busy road junction that it just couldn't have happened really. So if you know the Deneva building, which is on the site of the old school, it's not the easiest place to assemble a crowd.
Thank you, Chair.
Kim,
Councillor Black.
Will Jen Wilson actually be there?
Well, we're not having a ceremony as such, so we're just launching the film, but she's going to be on the film. She's going to be saying something. Yeah. So
very much recommend her book, by the way, which is called Freedom Music, Wales Emancipation and Jazz, which I have read. It's really good, actually. And the first chapter is all about Jessie Donaldson.
Yeah, I think the film is being put together by UW-TSD at the moment, and I think you'll find it's a really powerful film. It's really I've watched the elements of it being put together, and the supplied pictures from our archives and pictures from online resources. So I think it will be good, provided they do their job properly. But the constituent elements look good. So I think if once it's all knitted together, it will be worth it. So I'll send a link around at the appropriate time. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble. Does anybody want to raise any questions about the use of social media, talks, or anything else? Councillor James.
Kim, just a question through Chair. It's a very interesting subject. There's a lot of young people I speak to, and I know my colleague Peter Rees, who's the Cabinet Member for Education. There's a lot of interest in slave trade. It's an emotive subject, and I welcome this really. And I think it's good that it's such an emotive and important subject in our history that Welsh Government realise it should be an always affair, not just ourselves doing it to Swansea. What you're doing in Swansea is brilliant. But I think it's a very interesting subject, so increase in the calendar in schools and with young people. I don't know what you feel, Kim.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I think it's probably another example where West Glamorgan kind of leads the way in Wales. There've been a number of things over the years where we've done things pan Wales, and yet we've been kind of like the instigator. So if we go back a little way, we've had the Archives Wales Reader's Ticket, which is actually a pan England and Wales ticket. I would could say that it started in Swansea. I would say Swansea, I mean West Glamorgan, sorry, but you know what I mean. Started in this office that I'm sitting in the moment, and then the digitisation of the tithe maps of Wales, the Cynefin project, also, you know, it took root here. So, you know, we may be you know, struggling in terms of our premises, but I think it's important to say that a lot of what the impact of a service is able to provide also comes down to, you know, the way it's involved, the way it works, and the you know, in particular, one of the things that I've always seen as important is that when you come up with an idea, is that you look for willing participants to build a project, really. So we're on our own, we're quite small, but when we work together, then there is the opportunity to do things. And I think one of the things, going back to the slavery subject, you know, I raised it at the All Wales meeting in November, and people say, well, we don't have very much, and you know, what's the point of us taking part? But actually, when you put together the couple of things that every local office have, and then you start building them, and suddenly you've got, well, it's actually quite good, you know. And once the National Library gets on board, then they're greater resources. You know, there's the potential for actually having a really good educational resource on this really important topic. And of course, the Wales National Curriculum is going to be rebalanced. You're probably aware, Professor Charlotte Williams at Bangor University looking at ways in which the Wales National Curriculum should be rebalanced in treating the issue of slavery and empire. So it's very timely, the work that we're doing. So yeah, I'm hopeful that the result's going to be good.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Right, well, I'll go on to probably the biggest subject on this with slight look at the clock there on the thing, but the former British Home Stores building, which is the next section in the in my report. So a potential new home for the archives has arisen during the last quarter, which I think virtually every member will be familiar with this building in Swansea, and the fact that British Home Stores collapsed went into administration some time back. So it's currently being temporarily used by a sort of pop-up shop thing that the council, Swansea Council, has developed a project for its conversion for use as a community hub, which is essentially a sort of a common phrase, actually one-stop shop, and it was in vogue a few years back for engaging with all those front-facing parts of the council, whether it be help with benefits applications or opportunities for volunteering or other things. So the community hub concept is one that Welsh Government is also very, very keen on. At a relatively late stage in that thinking, because that was the concept has grown from that. Then the idea has arisen that the Central Library and the West Glamorgan Archives should go into that building. Now, we are part of the project, but it would only be if the building is suitable for conversion to archive accommodation, and there are very, as you can imagine, there are very precise and quite restricting conditions around where you can store archives, and I would perhaps if anybody's really very keen on the subject, there's a British standard 16893, but the key things about that are this is one would be one of the key things about putting the archives in that building. It is 4 hours fire prevention, or 4 hours fire resistance, I should say. So any archival storage area should be able to resist a fire for 4 hours. And also it should have security, so it should have intruder alarms. It should have a controlled temperature and humidity, a strong room environment, and it should have a security call out facility. Obviously, in this building where I am now, we've got security staff on site 24 hours, but that's not part of the requirement. But there is a security requirement as well, and some very obvious things like it shouldn't have windows and other things. So not every large former department store or shop is suitable for conversion into archive accommodation. I did raise in the because I'm sitting on the project team, and I raised in the meeting the issue of I think some members may remember the Woolworths fire in Manchester back in 1979, I think. You'll probably tell from my accent that I'm originally from the northwest of England, so it was kind of engraved on my memory thing. But one of the things I particularly remember was that people wouldn't leave the building because they didn't believe, and it went up very, very quickly in flames, and that was a concrete sort of post-war building, somewhat like the British Home Stores building. So I raised that, but it was totally blank faces. I'm obviously showing my age by raising this thing, but I think that was one of the cases which shows that concrete sort of construction buildings aren't necessarily the fire resistant buildings that we think they might be, because you think, oh, there's there's nothing to burn there, but actually they can go up quite quickly. So I think that would be my major consideration with regard to this. But to be fair to Tracy McNulty, she has said if it's not right for the archives, we won't go with it. And there is a multidisciplinary team that is shortly to be appointed that they will investigate its suitability as a sort of balance to make sure that we have specialists on site who can actually help with the if we have a general set of consultants, let's say it's Arup or Buckingham or whatever, and who don't have an expertise in the requirements for archival storage. What I've done is suggested by Welsh Government that we subscribe to the National Conservation Service, which has experts in archive building. Because to be fair, this is outside my level of expertise. Archive building, I don't have a huge experience in that. I'm aware of the British standard, but I'm not able to, for example, calculate floor loading or other things. So we need a lot of experts in the building field. So to bring more people on board who would have more a better picture of it. So essentially, we'd subscribe to 4 days of a consultant to assist us with finding out whether this building's suitable or not. Number of hands. I'm not sure who came in first, actually. Councillor Rees, maybe.
Thank you, Kim. If it isn't suitable, what's Plan B, Kim? And perhaps councillors, Swansea councillors can tell us, because we've been, as you know, we've been for years looking for a site for this eventuality. So what is Plan B?
Plan B for me would be that the archives are transferred to Glamorgan Archives in Cardiff and the Richard Burton Archives in Swansea, and councils will have to have their heads knocked together and come up with a plan B. But it's beyond the, obviously I'm not this is for councils. This is major work really, and it's up to it needs a political lead to actually say, well, we need to spend the money, and this is a priority. I would be as sad as I'm sure all members of the committee that the archives of this area would be transferred 40 miles east to Cardiff, but that is the nearest building that provides archival standard accommodation, and that would be infinitely preferable to putting them to storage in an industrial unit on the Swansea Enterprise Park, for example, which couldn't happen, I would hasten to add, because Welsh Government would intervene and say you can't do that. But that is Plan B, and that may happen in its own right, because the any archive building can take months, if not several years, to settle down in terms of stabilizing the temperature and humidity. So if we look at what's happening in Carmarthenshire, I mean, the building has been ready for well over a year. I know we've had COVID, so that's hampered things, but it's still drying out. Plaster takes ages to dry out, and then it was concrete as well. So there can be a lengthy period where the any new building is stabilizing, drying out before it's ready to receive the archives. So it may just happen that we need to transfer the archives temporarily, but it would be much better to know where they were going and to know what the end game was for where they might go. But to transfer them without knowing where they would go would be Plan B, but it would be disappointing, I would say. I ought to defer. I think Councillor Black was next, actually.
I can't say I know any more, but the discussions I've had is that they seem to think that it's doable, but I'm assuming that is that they will be able to adapt the building to make it possible to bring it up to the archival standard, and then that has to be seen to be believed. So I think we have I don't think there is a plan B at the moment, but that's my understanding. What they're looking to invest in the building, and they have a grant to do that as well from the Welsh Government. So, that is helpful, and presumably they can apply for grant in terms of the archives as well, Kim, to help towards that cost. The question I had though, the subscriptions to the National Conservation Service and the 4 days work of the consultant, will that come out of our budget, or will that be part of the budget which is being put aside for this conversion?
I think that's coming out of our budget. I think that is money well spent.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
But I think if the so basically there is one person in the whole of the UK that people say you need to get them on board. He's called Chris Woods. He's one of the directors of the National Conservation Service, and my colleagues in Welsh Government in MALD, as it used to be called, or Department of Culture and Sport as it is now, said you need to talk to this person. So I did, and we came up with the solution that the best way is to have a subscription. But I think, yes, as part of the project, they may need to take on more of his time, because if anybody knows whether this building is suitable, he will know. He's advised a whole number of other archives across the UK about the suitability of conversions and so on. So I think we have to use the best. I think we've done very well in a way, because I mean his day works out as £250 per day, which when you hear the prices that some of the consultants on the test and trace scheme in England are being paid, then that's quite a
That
quite
sounds like
good
value
value
for
in
money.
comparison. Yes.
I think this is money well spent if it comes out positive. But if
Yes.
it comes out negative, then it's money down the drain in a sense. It could be back to square one.
Yeah. I think Councillor Jones was next, actually, and then Councillor Smith.
Great, thanks. I don't know any more about it either, but what I would say is that the BHS store, if it's suitable, and the suitability is really important, as you rightly said, it would be a good site because you've got accessibility from. It's close to the railway station. It's close to the centre of town. So I think a lot of people would be able to use it, but it's got to be suitable. But I think there needs to be a plan. Really, because we have talked about this, as Peter mentioned. We've talked about this for, as Peter Rees, a long time, certainly since I've been on the committee. So there needs to be a plan and a bit of a roadmap to get us where we want to be. But I think for the service to go to Cardiff, even for a short time, I think is not terribly acceptable at all. And people in locally and Swansea and Leith will lose out on the accessibility of that service that they've got now.
I take your point thoroughly on board, Lyndon, about the political, the niceties of the fact that they go to Cardiff. But the ultimate, and Andrew would back me up on this. Ultimately, as archivists, what we have to do is the preservation of the collections. I mean, that's paramount. I mean, obviously, the public service is important, and indeed the niceties of it being transferred, or indeed split, it having to be split. But we have to make sure that the collections are preserved for future generations. So it has to be stored in archival accommodation, and if that's the nearest accommodation, I mean, there are other options. That there are other stores. There is a salt mine in Cheshire, for example. You could transfer the whole of the collections there, and they would be. They are wonderfully. The temperature and humidity are wonderfully constant because of the. You may actually have seen it on television things, but obviously the collections would be totally inaccessible if they were put in there. But the National Archives use them, and they're used probably for by the major museums and galleries as well for storage of paintings and other artifacts and things like that, because they are so dry and so stable. But it means that at least everything is preserved, but it's not accessible. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just want to ask Chris Woods. You mentioned and spoke of his expertise. Do we know what the timescale is to engage Chris with the site in the former British Home Stores site?
Well, the first thing that as soon as we're able to, a site visit has been arranged for Welsh Government to come down to Swansea. So I think they're either in Cardiff or Aberystwyth. Obviously, the Mald are up in Aberystwyth, but I think the main people are over in Cardiff. So as soon as it's safe to do so, they'll do a site visit. And I'd like one of the days for Chris Woods to come over and for him to be on that tour.
So the people from Malda, are they building surveyors?
No, but they are just as aware as I am of the requirements of BS 16893. They will come. I think the main input would be from people like Chris Woods. But however, the main funder for the building's conversion is the regeneration team in Cardiff from Welsh Government. So the concept of the community hub is one that the Welsh Government is very keen to promote. I'm sure some members must have, because it's not the only community hub across Wales, but I think the Welsh Government is very keen on this idea at the moment, that you have a sort of one-stop shop thing for many things. So that's being promoted by Welsh Government officers who are in Cardiff. So they want to see what Swansea is proposing. I presume that people from the multidisciplinary team would also come along. So they'll be the engineering and architectural experts that would come along, but they would presumably have access, unlimited access during the period of the contract. So the contract is going to start shortly because the closing date was the 3rd of March, and so they're presumably shortlisting at the moment.
Because from my reading of what you've just said, Kim, a lot will depend on literally the bricks and mortar and what can be adapted and other conditions appropriate for an archive to be located there, and that's a structural issue as much as we can talk about the concept as much as we like, but we need to make the structure is allowed to be done.
I think what we really need is a team. So a multidisciplinary team will not in themselves, I am going to imagine, have a huge amount of expertise in archival accommodation. I mean, I'm led, my suspicions are somewhat confirmed by one of the questions in the invitation to tender questions, when from one of the potential applicants said, what type of archives is it proposed to store in the building, which wasn't really didn't inspire a huge amount of confidence in their ability to understand about archival accommodation. So I'm going to guess that the successful team have probably put in a better bid than that, but on the other hand, they won't really understand. They've been given the British Standard reference, but they're probably not going to have a huge amount of experience in this field. So we really need to make sure that the experts get in there and really make clear what the requirements are.
Yeah.
I mean, I just mentioned this because I was involved when I got involved. This was before any appointment to the MDT. Were the concept that seemed to be floating around in some of the literature that I saw was that you could just put the archives on the top floor of a 3-floor building. So obviously with these types of stores, the higher you go up, as you can see when you wander around the centre of Swansea, what you do over the shop is always a problem. A problem generally, actually. Do you convert it into flats, or do you use it for stores for the shop or whatever? So part of the original idea, I think, was that the archives could go on the 3rd floor because nobody wants to go up to the 3rd floor. But of course, then you've got the problem that they're essentially just exposed. You had a fire start on the ground floor. Yeah, how do you have 4 hours fire prevention between the 3rd floor and the ground floor? So it's not. I think that they're going to have to come to the reality that it needs to be partitioned off in some way, which involves more structural work than maybe the initial idea about, it'd be very good to put the archives in. I mean, the same sort of conversation has come up with I've had various people saying, well, Debenhams would be a very good place to put the archives in. Of course, how do you have 4 hours fire prevention in a store like that? That it's not, they're not built for that kind of thing. They're built for having multiple fire exits and getting everybody out, but you just let the fire brigade deal with the thing. So it's not not about that.
Okay, thanks.
I will keep members informed at the next meeting as to how it's going. The thing, but I think obviously it's all very open at the moment. With regard to will it be suitable or not be suitable, and I think that will come down to the quality of the MDT, the multidisciplinary team, and their ability to see how it might work. I mean, another consideration is will it all fit in? I mean, I did go to British Home Stores when it was open, but it's been closed for a long time, and I've hardly been to the thing. And everybody said, "Oh, it's huge," or "It used to be huge." But we are talking about putting in an archive, a central library, and then all sorts of other offices where people can interact with, Swansea Council for Voluntary Services, other things, the contact centre. So there's quite a lot that they're planning to put into the building. And although people say it's huge, I don't recall it being that huge. I mean, most of my experience of it recently has been on Google Earth and Street View, actually. So I haven't even been for a wander around, but it's perhaps not as big as maybe all the things that people are thinking could go in that building.
I'm trying to recall it. I mean, I think there was the shop, the main shop, but presumably there was a storage area as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how much we as a public saw of that site. I don't know, but I mean, it's years since I've been in there.
Yeah, I have to say that Google Earth and Street View have been very useful in the last month or two, really, in terms of, well, I can't actually get there, although technically I could get there in 10 minutes walking from where I am at the moment, but you can learn as much from navigating around places on Street View and Google Earth, really.
My wife had a natural talent for those kind of places, so I always left it to her.
You didn't wander around thinking, "Oh, this could be the archives in a few years' time." Okay, well, are there any other questions on that? We had better, I see time goes on, I better just finish off. If obviously it's a continuing story, so I'll continue to update members in future meetings, and I don't think that necessarily a significant decision will have been made in by the time of our June meeting. We're not sure, but the work is presumably going to be still ongoing on as to whether it's feasible or not. I'll move on. We've looked at fees and charges. I just mentioned that we have a vacancy at the moment, staff vacancy. We lost the Family History Centre supervisor, who's gone to work for the NHS. The figures very low for the last quarter, as you might imagine. So just 26 users in Swansea. It does mean that next year the figures are going to increase. Hopefully, if we've got a normal service, they'll be going bouncing back up to normal, and huge increases in use. Talks and meetings I've talked about. Accession of archive collections as in Appendix 2. I'll just mention that we purchased a set of illuminated addresses to Sir Henry Hussey Vivian. I was really pleased to be able to purchase them. I didn't know they'd gone up for auction, and the person who bought them obviously had second thoughts about how much he'd paid for them, so he offered them to us for what he'd paid, and they have arrived, and they are very nice. I hope at some point, maybe one day, you might be able to get to see them, but they're really nice things. In the immediate term, I propose that we'll take some digital photographs and put them in our annual report, which will be coming up in the next few months. That normally comes out in May. Which concludes my report rather quickly, but if anybody wants to make any further comments or ask any questions on the remainder of the report.
No further questions. Thank you very much once again, Kim. Excellent report, extremely interesting. And I think as we come to the end, or rather to the last meeting of this municipal year, and we can look back and over a year under COVID, it has been very challenging for everybody, and certainly for the archives service. But I think it's also perhaps given some opportunities as well. But I think those challenges are going to continue for the service in the near future. But as I say, most interesting meeting, and particularly look forward to the resource on the slave trade. That's going to be very exciting, and I think that really does illustrate the quality of our archive service. I think we must be very proud of our staff and what they've done and what they continue to do. You know, being trailblazers really across Wales for many different projects does reflect enormously on the asset that we have here in West Glamorgan. Thank you, Peter, for the tip about the book, and I shall go and get that. That does sound extremely interesting. And you know, the unveiling of the blue plaque to Jessie Donaldson, again, what a fantastic thing that will be for the area, and once more putting West Glamorgan on the map. Yes, the figures are really quite, well, they just reflect what's happened, don't they, and the use of the archives. But nevertheless, again, in there is still the demand for the service, and we must never forget that it has been an unusual year, but that demand is still there and will continue to be so. But the challenges, of course, are there for the volunteers and for the staff as well as you come back into work. As you rightly said, Kim, you've got a lot of catching up to do with what you haven't been able to do in the past, but also looking forward to the packing up of the archives, and perhaps your staff will be actually raring to go, you know, coming back from a year when they haven't been able to do what I imagine is the things that they enjoy, dealing with the collections and doing the conservation and everything else. I'm sure they're going to welcome that and relish that change. I think your comments on the building, we had a really good summary from you there, Kim, on what's happened so far, and all of us are as one. I have no doubt, absolutely essential that the conditions are right, that it does conform to the standards, notwithstanding that it's going to be an ideal location. Nevertheless, the important thing is that that we do achieve those standards and the collection is housed under the safe and correct environment. And I think we often perhaps dismiss consultants, but I think in this case, engaging the consultants will be absolutely money well spent. To have the best two advisors is going to be essential, because nobody will know more than him, and we will probably ignore his advice and his recommendations at our peril, and we mustn't do that. And again, I think your comment there about the Woolworths building in 1979. I know you joked about showing your age there, Kim, but I think it really does highlight that actually what's gone on in the past is so important for us not to forget and to learn from it and apply it to the future. And it's understandable that younger people will not know these things. Therefore, we need people like you with that knowledge, and also, you know, the archive service as a whole. We still need what's gone in the past to be able to draw that into the future and to learn from it. So thank you, for a very interesting meeting. Please do give our thanks to the staff for coping so stoically with the challenges that they've experienced over the last year. I'm sure you are very proud of them as the manager of the service. We are proud of them as well. And I say, please do thank them on our behalf for what they've done and how they've coped and how they're going to cope with the challenges going forward. And we look forward to the next meeting soon. So thank you all very much for your contributions.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lieutenant, and everyone.
Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.